Admiral Marcus Holloway was a name that commanded respect. For over 3 decades, he had served in the U.S. Navy, rising through the ranks despite countless obstacles. Born into a modest family in a small town, Marcus always dreamed of serving his country. His journey wasn't easy. Growing up, he faced prejudice and doubt at every turn. People often told him he wouldn't make it far because of the color of his skin, but Marcus didn't listen. He worked harder than anyone else, earning scholarships to prestigious military academies and proving time and again that he belonged. During his career, Marcus became known for his sharp mind, unwavering discipline, and ability to lead under pressure. He played key roles in some of the most challenging naval operations, earning medals and accolades along the way. Beyond his tactical brilliance, Marcus was deeply committed to mentoring younger sailors, especially those from marginalized communities. He believed in lifting others as he climbed, sharing wisdom gained from years of navigating both literal and metaphorical storms. But Marcus's achievements weren't just about personal success. They were milestones for representation. As one of the first African-American admirals in the Navy's history, he shattered glass ceilings and inspired generations. His story was proof that perseverance could overcome even the toughest barriers. Yet, despite all his accomplishments, Marcus remained humble. Friends described him as approachable and kind-hearted, someone who never let his titles go to his head. Now retired, Marcus finally had time to enjoy life outside the rigors of military service. He loved traveling, exploring new places, and meeting people from different walks of life. This week, he planned a trip to visit old friends across the country, a much-needed break after years of relentless dedication. Excited for the journey, Marcus booked a first-class ticket, looking forward to comfort and relaxation during the long flight. Little did he know, this seemingly ordinary trip would become unforgettable, not for joyous reasons, but for something far more profound. As Marcus packed his bags, memories of his career flashed through his mind. From standing on the deck of a ship watching the sunrise to dressing rooms filled with eager cadets, each moment had shaped him into the man he was today. Though he carried scars, both visible and invisible, from battles fought and injustices endured, Marcus wore them like badges of honor. They reminded him of how far he'd come and how much farther society still needed to go. With a deep breath, he zipped up his suitcase, ready to step into what he thought would be a peaceful chapter of his life. What awaited him, however, would test not only his patience, but also the conscience of everyone around him. The day of the flight arrived, and Admiral Marcus Holloway stepped into the bustling airport with a calm demeanor. Dressed in casual yet polished attire, he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had defined him throughout his career. After checking in and collecting his boarding pass, Marcus made his way to the gate, looking forward to a smooth journey ahead. First class wasn't just about luxury for him. It was a small reward after years of sacrifice and hard work. It symbolized comfort, respect, and a momentary escape from the weight of responsibility he carried for so long. When boarding began, Marcus joined the line alongside other passengers. As he approached the entrance to the plane, he handed his ticket to the flight attendant with a polite smile. But instead of the usual warm welcome or confirmation of his seat assignment, something felt off. The attendant hesitated, glancing at the ticket before exchanging a quick, uneasy look with a colleague. "Sir," she said finally, her voice tinged with awkwardness, "there seems to be an issue with your reservation." Marcus frowned slightly but remained composed. "What kind of issue?" he asked, his tone measured and calm. "I'm sorry, but it appears there's been an overbooking error," the attendant replied, avoiding direct eye contact. "Your first-class seat is no longer available." For a brief moment, Marcus simply stood there, processing her words. Overbooking errors happened occasionally, but this situation felt different. He noticed how the attendant avoided meeting his gaze, fumbling with papers as if searching for an excuse. And then, as he glanced around, he saw subtle reactions from nearby passengers. Whispers exchanged between strangers, some shaking their heads disapprovingly. One older woman muttered under her breath, "This doesn't happen to everyone." Though nothing explicit was said, Marcus understood what was unfolding. This wasn't merely an administrative oversight. It was likely rooted in bias. It wouldn't have been the first time someone questioned whether he truly belonged in spaces reserved for privilege. Yet he refused to let frustration take hold. With grace, he accepted the economy-class boarding pass offered to him and continued toward his new seat, determined not to cause a scene. As he settled into the cramped quarters of the economy section, Marcus couldn't help but feel a familiar pang of disappointment. Throughout his life, he'd encountered moments like these, instances where his presence was met with skepticism or outright hostility. Each time, he chose to rise above it, knowing that anger wouldn't change hearts or minds. Still, this incident stung more than usual. Here he was, a retired admiral who had given decades of service to his country, being treated as though he didn't deserve the simplest comforts afforded to others. Unbeknownst to Marcus, his plight hadn't gone unnoticed. A few rows ahead, Captain Elena Rodriguez, an off-duty commercial airline pilot, watched the entire exchange unfold. She recognized the Admiral instantly, having read about his storied career and groundbreaking achievements. What she witnessed angered her deeply, not because of the inconvenience caused to Marcus, but because of the blatant disrespect behind it. To her, this wasn't just about one man being denied a seat. It was about systemic inequality rearing its ugly head once again. Elena clenched her fists, torn between speaking up immediately and waiting for the right moment. She knew that challenging authority mid-flight could escalate tensions, but staying silent felt equally wrong. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Elena resolved to act. This injustice wouldn't go unaddressed, not on her watch. For now, however, all she could do was sit quietly, her mind racing with plans to ensure that Admiral Holloway received the dignity and respect he deserved. As the plane taxied down the runway, Admiral Marcus Holloway sat quietly in his economy seat, trying to focus on the hum of the engines and the anticipation of takeoff. He kept his emotions in check, maintaining the same stoic composure that had carried him through countless challenges in his life. The injustice of the situation weighed heavily on his mind, but he reminded himself that anger wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he chose to let it go, for now, and turned his attention to the book he brought along for the flight. A few rows ahead, Captain Elena Rodriguez couldn't shake off what she'd witnessed at the gate. Her hands gripped the armrests tightly as her thoughts raced. How could something like this happen? Here was a man who had devoted his entire life to serving others, protecting freedoms many took for granted, yet he was treated as though he didn't belong. Elena's heart burned with indignation. She knew firsthand how rare it was to see someone like Admiral Holloway rise to such heights in any field, let alone one as historically rigid as the military. His accomplishments weren't just personal victories. They were milestones for representation and progress. Elena glanced back toward Marcus, catching a glimpse of his calm expression despite the obvious discomfort of the cramped seating. That quiet dignity struck her deeply. It wasn't fair. People like him shouldn't have to endure these kinds of indignities after everything they'd already overcome. As a pilot herself, Elena understood the importance of respect and professionalism in every interaction. Seeing Marcus treated so dismissively went against everything she believed in. Once the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign turned off, Elena unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. With purposeful steps, she approached the front of the cabin where the flight attendants were stationed. They looked surprised to see her, recognizing her uniform immediately. "Excuse me," she said firmly, drawing their attention. "I need to understand why Admiral Holloway was moved out of first class." The lead flight attendant hesitated, clearly flustered by the question. "Ma'am, we've explained. It was an overbooking issue. There was nothing we could do." Elena raised an eyebrow, her voice steady but sharp. "An overbooking issue? Really? Because I didn't see anyone else being bumped to economy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't protocol to prioritize resolving issues for passengers with higher tier tickets? Or does that only apply when those passengers fit a certain profile? Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The flight attendants exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure how to respond. One of them stammered, We followed procedure, Mom." "Did you?" Elena countered, her tone unyielding. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you singled out someone who happens to be black and decided he didn't deserve the seat he paid for. Do you realize who Admiral Holloway is? Do you know what he's done for this country? He's not just another passenger. He's a national hero." The tension in the aisle grew palpable. Other passengers nearby began to overhear the conversation, turning their heads to listen. Some nodded in agreement, while others whispered among themselves. Elena's voice, though controlled, carried authority and conviction. She wasn't just speaking for Marcus. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been made to feel lesser because of prejudice or bias. Realizing the situation was escalating, the lead flight attendant tried to placate her. "Ma'am, please, let us handle this internally. We'll make sure Admiral Holloway is taken care of." But Elena wasn't satisfied. "Taken care of?" she repeated, incredulous. "You've already disrespected him once. What exactly are you going to do now? Offer him a free drink voucher?" "This isn't about fixing things later. This is about accountability. You need to acknowledge what happened here today." With that, Elena returned to her seat, still simmering with frustration. She knew she couldn't force an immediate resolution, but she also knew she couldn't stay silent. Something had to be done, not just for Marcus, but for everyone watching. If this kind of behavior was allowed to slide without consequence, then nothing would ever change. Back in his seat, Marcus noticed the murmurs around him and caught fragments of Elena's confrontation. Though he appreciated her courage, he felt a pang of guilt for causing such a stir. All he wanted was a peaceful journey, not to become the center of attention. Still, deep down, he recognized the significance of what was unfolding. This wasn't just about one flight or one seat. It was about standing up against systemic injustice whenever and wherever it occurred. And as the plane soared through the clouds, the seeds of change were beginning to take root among the passengers on board. As the plane cruised smoothly through the sky, Captain Elena Rodriguez sat in her seat, her mind racing with thoughts about what she had just witnessed and how to address it. The murmurs among passengers were growing louder, snippets of conversations floating through the cabin. Some expressed disbelief at the airline's actions, while others seemed hesitant to speak up, unsure of what to say or do. But Elena knew that silence wouldn't solve anything. This moment demanded action, bold, clear, and unapologetic. Taking a deep breath, Elena stood up once again. This time, instead of heading toward the flight attendants, she walked to the center aisle where everyone could see her. Her presence commanded attention immediately. Passengers turned their heads, curious about what this off-duty pilot was going to do next. She adjusted her uniform slightly, a subtle reminder of her authority, and then addressed the cabin in a calm but firm voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone steady and deliberate, "I need your attention for a moment. What happened today is something we can't ignore. Admiral Marcus Holloway, a decorated Navy officer who has served our country with honor and distinction, is sitting in economy class right now because he was denied the first-class seat he reserved and paid for." A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin as people processed her words. Many craned their necks to get a better look at Marcus, who sat quietly in his seat, visibly uncomfortable with being the center of attention. Elena continued, her voice rising slightly to emphasize her point. "Admiral Holloway isn't just any passenger. He's one of the highest-ranking African-American officers in the history of the U.S. Navy. He's dedicated decades of his life to protecting the freedoms we all enjoy. Yet here we are, watching him endure an injustice that no one should have to face. Especially not someone who has given so much to this nation." Elena paused, letting her words sink in. The cabin was silent now, every eye on her. She scanned the faces around her, seeing a mix of emotions: shock, anger, empathy, and even guilt. "This isn't just about overbooking or a simple mistake," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's about respect, or the lack of it. It's about recognizing the value of every individual, regardless of their race, background, or status. And when we fail to do that, we're all complicit in perpetuating inequality." Her speech struck a chord with many passengers. One man leaned forward in his seat, nodding vigorously. A young woman whispered to her companion, "She's right. This is wrong." Even the flight attendants looked uneasy, retreating slightly into the galley as if trying to distance themselves from the mounting tension. Elena wasn't finished yet. "Now, I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "But I do know this. Admiral Holloway deserves better. We all deserve better. If we stay silent when things like this happen, nothing will ever change. So I'm asking you, all of you, to think about what kind of world you want to live in. Do we accept discrimination, or do we stand up against it?" Her final words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone on board. For a few moments, there was complete silence, broken only by the soft hum of the plane's engines. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the cabin. It started with one person clapping, then another, until the entire plane erupted in support. Passengers cheered, some standing up to show their solidarity. Tears welled up in a few eyes, including those of the older woman who had muttered earlier about the unfairness of the situation. Marcus, still seated in economy, felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. He hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted to draw attention, but he couldn't deny the power of the moment. Here was a group of strangers coming together, united by a shared sense of justice. As the applause continued, he gave a small, grateful nod to Elena, acknowledging her courage and leadership. For Elena, the response reinforced why she had spoken up in the first place. Change didn't happen in silence. It happened when people refused to look away. And though this incident was far from resolved, she knew they had taken the first step toward accountability, and perhaps toward something greater. The applause in the cabin lingered, filling the space with a sense of unity and purpose. Passengers exchanged glances, some smiling warmly at Admiral Marcus Holloway, others whispering words of encouragement to their neighbors. The energy had shifted dramatically. What started as an ordinary flight was now charged with emotion and determination. For many on board, this wasn't just about one man being treated unfairly. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it felt uncomfortable or inconvenient. Elena returned to her seat, but her speech continued to resonate throughout the cabin. People began talking among themselves, sharing stories of times they'd witnessed or experienced similar injustices. A middle-aged businessman leaned over to his wife, recounting how he once saw someone turned away from a restaurant simply because of the color of their skin. "It's always the same," he said, shaking his head. "But today feels different. Today, we're actually doing something about it." Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly in his economy seat, touched by the overwhelming support, but also humbled by the attention. He hadn't asked for any of this. He'd only wanted to enjoy a peaceful flight, but he couldn't deny the significance of the moment. Here were strangers, people from all walks of life, choosing to stand with him in solidarity. It reminded him of why he'd spent so much of his career mentoring young sailors and advocating for equality. Because change happened when people came together. Amid the buzz of conversation, a tall man seated near the front of the economy section stood up. Dressed in a sharp suit, he introduced himself as Richard, a corporate executive returning home after a business trip. Clearing his throat, he addressed the cabin. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, his voice steady but sincere. "I don't usually speak up like this, but I feel compelled to say something. Admiral Holloway deserves better than this, as a token of respect. And honestly, as an apology for what happened, I'd like to offer my first-class seat to him." The cabin erupted into another round of applause. Richard waved off the cheers modestly, explaining that he didn't need the extra legroom anyway and would be perfectly comfortable in economy. His gesture sparked a chain reaction. Another passenger offered to switch seats with Marcus if needed, while a family nearby insisted they'd happily make room for him. Each act of kindness added to the growing wave of goodwill spreading through the plane. Marcus, however, remained hesitant. Rising slowly from his seat, he raised a hand to quiet the cabin. "Thank you, all of you, for your support," he said, his voice warm but firm. "It means more to me than I can express, but I don't want anyone giving up their seat on my account. That's not why we're here. This isn't about me moving to first class. It's about recognizing that no one should be treated this way, regardless of where they sit." His words struck a chord with everyone. Even those who had initially cheered Richard's offer nodded in agreement. Marcus was right. This wasn't just about fixing one mistake. It was about addressing the deeper issue behind it. The passengers realized that their actions mattered, not just in this moment, but in setting an example for how to respond to injustice whenever they encountered it. As the flight attendants looked on, visibly uneasy but unable to intervene without risking further backlash, Alina stood again. She thanked Richard for his generosity and acknowledged Marcus's humility, then turned her focus back to the bigger picture. "What we've done here today is powerful," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We've shown that when we see something wrong, we have the power to speak up and make things right. But let's not stop here. Let's take this spirit of accountability back to our homes, workplaces, and communities, because real change starts with moments like this." Her final remarks left the cabin buzzing with renewed energy. Conversations resumed, but this time with a shared sense of hope and possibility. Passengers exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch and continue the dialogue beyond the flight. Some even joked about forming a group called Passengers for Justice, dedicated to calling out unfair treatment wherever they saw it. For Marcus, the experience reinforced his lifelong belief in the goodness of people. Despite the prejudice he'd faced throughout his career, he'd always maintained faith in humanity's ability to rise above divisiveness. Today proved him right. And for Alina, seeing the collective courage of the passengers reaffirmed her commitment to fighting inequality, not just within the aviation industry, but everywhere. As the plane soared onward, the atmosphere inside the cabin felt lighter, almost. When the plane finally touched down and taxied to the gate, the energy in the cabin remained electric. Passengers gathered their belongings, but instead of the usual rush to disembark, there was a sense of unity that lingered. The applause and support for Admiral Marcus Holloway had transformed what could have been an ordinary flight into something extraordinary, a moment of collective defiance against injustice. As people prepared to leave, many paused to shake Marcus's hand or offer words of gratitude. "You're an inspiration, sir," said a young man with a backpack slung over his shoulder. "Thank you for everything you've done." Others chimed in, sharing how moved they were by his grace under pressure and Alina's boldness in speaking up. A mother holding her toddler whispered, "I want my son to grow up knowing about people like you, people who lead with dignity and strength." Each comment carried weight, not just for Marcus, but for everyone listening. It wasn't every day that strangers came together so genuinely, united by a shared desire for fairness and respect. As passengers began filing off the plane, one woman approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as Lisa, a school teacher from Chicago. "Admiral Holloway, I just want to say thank you for your service, yes, but also for showing us all how to handle adversity with such poise. You didn't lash out or let anger take over. You stayed calm and reminded us what real leadership looks like." Marcus smiled warmly, touched by her words. "Thank you," he replied, "for standing with me today, for speaking up. None of this would have happened without all of you." Meanwhile, Captain Alina Rodriguez stood near the exit, watching the scene unfold. Her heart swelled with pride, not just for Marcus, but for the passengers who had chosen to act. This wasn't just about calling out discrimination. It was about creating a ripple effect of change. Every person who walked off that plane carried a story they'd tell friends, family, and coworkers about what had happened. And those stories mattered. They had the power to spark conversations, challenge biases, and inspire action. But the airline staff weren't oblivious to the brewing storm. By now, word of the incident had reached senior management on the ground, thanks to social media posts from passengers live tweeting and sharing videos of the event. One tweet read, "An African-American Navy admiral was denied first class today. Watch what happened next. It'll restore your faith in humanity." Within minutes, the hashtag Justice for Holloway began trending, drawing attention from news outlets and advocacy groups alike. By the time Marcus stepped off the plane, reporters were waiting at the gate, cameras rolling. Passengers surrounded him, shielding him from any potential discomfort while loudly recounting the details of the incident. Richard, the businessman who had offered his seat, spoke passionately to the press. "This isn't just about a seat assignment," he said. "It's about recognizing the value of every individual, no matter who they are. Admiral Holloway is a hero, and treating him this way is unacceptable." The airline representatives scrambled to respond. Two executives arrived, visibly flustered, offering profuse apologies and attempting to escort Marcus away for a private discussion. But Marcus, ever composed, insisted on addressing the crowd first. "I appreciate your concern," he told the reporters, "but let's be clear, this isn't about me. It's about ensuring that everyone is treated with respect moving forward. Mistakes happen, but systemic issues require systemic solutions." His measured tone silenced the murmurs around him. Even the airline executives seemed taken aback by his composure. One of them, a vice president of customer relations, promised immediate action. "We deeply regret what occurred today," he stated publicly. "Admiral Holloway deserves nothing less than our utmost respect, and we will conduct a thorough investigation to ensure this never happens again. We invite him to speak with our leadership team about diversity and inclusion within our company." Though the apology felt hollow to some, others saw it as a starting point. Marcus accepted the gesture graciously, emphasizing that true accountability would come through tangible changes, not empty promises. He thanked the passengers once more before stepping aside, allowing the crowd to disperse slowly. Alina watched from a distance, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. What had started as a routine flight had turned into a pivotal moment for everyone involved. As she walked toward baggage claim, she couldn't help but smile. Today proved that when people chose courage over silence, even the smallest acts of resistance could lead to monumental shifts. And as the passengers went their separate ways, each carried with them the memory of a flight that changed more than just their travel plans. It changed. In the days following the flight, the story of Admiral Marcus Holloway and Captain Alina Rodriguez exploded into the national spotlight. Social media platforms buzzed with posts about the incident, with hashtags like #JusticeForHolloway and #StandWithAdmiral trending for hours. Passengers who were on the flight shared videos, photos, and first-hand accounts, painting a vivid picture of what had unfolded. The collective outrage was palpable, but so was the admiration for Marcus's quiet dignity, for Alina's fierce advocacy, and for the passengers who stood together in solidarity. News outlets picked up the story, framing it not just as an isolated case of discrimination, but as a reflection of broader societal issues. Talk shows invited experts to discuss systemic racism and unconscious bias within industries like aviation. Opinion pieces flooded newspapers, some praising the courage of those on board, others criticizing the airline for failing to address such biases long before this incident occurred. It seemed everyone had something to say, and the conversation kept growing louder. The airline, now under intense scrutiny, scrambled to mitigate the backlash. They released a formal statement apologizing to Admiral Holloway and announcing plans to implement mandatory diversity training for all employees. Additionally, they offered Marcus lifetime first-class privileges and extended the same benefit to any active or retired military personnel, a gesture intended to demonstrate their commitment to honoring service members. While some praised the move as a step in the right direction, others dismissed it as too little, too late. Determined to ensure accountability, Marcus agreed to meet with the airline's leadership team. He understood that apologies meant nothing without action, and he saw an opportunity to push for meaningful change. During the meeting, he didn't mince words. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated mistake," he said firmly. "It was symptomatic of deeper issues within your organization, and likely others like it. If you truly want to make amends, focus on creating systems that prevent these kinds of incidents from happening again." Marcus outlined specific recommendations: transparent policies for handling overbooking disputes, regular audits to identify patterns of bias, and partnerships with advocacy groups to promote inclusivity across the industry. To his surprise, the executives listened intently, taking notes and promising to act on his suggestions. One even admitted, "We've failed not only you but our customers as well. We need to do better, and we will." Beyond the airline, the ripple effects of the incident continued to spread. Advocacy organizations seized the moment to amplify calls for reform in corporate practices related to racial equity. A coalition of pilots, led by Alina, launched a campaign urging airlines to adopt stricter anti-discrimination protocols. Their petition garnered thousands of signatures within days, putting additional pressure on the industry to take concrete steps toward progress. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself thrust into a new role, that of a public figure advocating for change. Invitations poured in for him to speak at conferences, corporate events, and community forums. Though initially hesitant, he accepted several offers, knowing his voice could inspire others to demand fairness and respect. At each event, he shared his story, not to dwell on the injustice he faced, but to highlight the importance of unity and perseverance. "Change doesn't come overnight," he often said, "but when we stand together, we can move mountains." Alina, too, became a vocal advocate for equitable treatment in air travel. She used her platform to call out discriminatory practices and champion initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity. Her actions inspired colleagues across the aviation world to join the cause, forming networks dedicated to addressing bias and promoting equal treatment for all passengers. As weeks turned into months, the impact of that single flight became undeniable. Policies began shifting, not just within the airline involved, but throughout the industry. Conversations about race, privilege, and systemic inequality gained momentum, encouraging individuals and institutions alike to examine their roles in perpetuating injustice. And while there was still much work to be done, one thing was clear: what happened on that plane had sparked something powerful, a movement fueled by ordinary people choosing to stand up, speak out, and refuse to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. Months after the incident, the story of Admiral Marcus Holloway and Captain Alina Rodriguez continued to resonate far beyond the confines of that single flight. What had started as a personal affront to one man had evolved into a catalyst for change, sparking conversations about equality and respect in ways no one could have predicted. The ripple effects were felt not just in the aviation industry, but across society at large. For Marcus, life took on a new dimension. He embraced his role as an advocate, traveling across the country to speak at schools, corporations, and community events. His speeches weren't about blame or bitterness. They were about hope, resilience, and collective action. "I spent my life breaking barriers," he often said, "but I can't do it alone." Real change happens when we all step up and say, "Enough is enough." Audiences hung on his every word, inspired by his humility and unwavering belief in humanity's potential to improve. Alina, too, became a symbol of courage and accountability. Her decision to confront the injustice head-on earned her widespread admiration, and she used her newfound platform wisely. She partnered with advocacy groups to create workshops for airline staff, teaching them how to recognize and address bias in their daily interactions. Pilots and flight attendants from around the world reached out to thank her for shining a light on issues they'd witnessed but never known how to tackle. Together, they formed a coalition called Sky Without Bias, dedicated to promoting fairness and inclusion in air travel. The airline involved in the incident worked hard to rebuild trust. They implemented many of Marcus's recommendations, including transparent overbooking policies and mandatory diversity training programs. More importantly, they established an advisory board comprising experts in racial equity and customer experience to ensure ongoing accountability. While some critics remained skeptical, others acknowledged the company's genuine efforts to turn a painful moment into an opportunity for growth. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt among the passengers who had been on board that day. Many stayed in touch, forming a tight-knit group they jokingly referred to as Flight 412 family. They shared updates on their lives, celebrated milestones together, and continued to support causes related to justice and equality. Richard, the businessman who offered his first-class seat, even organized a fundraiser to create scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation. It was his way of paying forward the inspiration he'd drawn from Marcus and Alina. The media coverage eventually faded, but the lessons from that flight endured. Teachers incorporated the story into lesson plans, using it to teach students about standing up against discrimination. Corporations cited it during diversity workshops, emphasizing the importance of allyship and speaking out. And families discussed it around dinner tables, reminding each other that even small acts of courage could lead to big changes. For Marcus and Alina, the experience reinforced their belief in the power of community. Neither of them had sought the spotlight, but both recognized its value in driving progress. As they reflected on everything that had transpired, they marveled at how a seemingly ordinary day had transformed into something extraordinary. It wasn't just about one seat on a plane. It was about creating a world where everyone, regardless of race, background, or status, could feel valued and respected. In the end, the legacy of that flight lived on, not as a tale of conflict, but as a testament to what could be achieved when people chose compassion over indifference, unity over division, and action over silence. Admiral Marcus Holloway and Captain Alina Rodriguez proved that even in moments of adversity, there was always room for hope, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could ignite the biggest movements.